Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Don't Risk It podcast presented by VFIS Client Risk Solutions. This program focuses on the exposures our clients frequently encounter and discusses some potential solutions to help reduce these exposures. I'm your host, Chris Rogers with VFIS Client Risk Solutions, and today we're talking about first responder units. Joining me on the program today are Mike Baker and Dave Bradley, and they're both members of the Client Risk Solutions team. They're here to discuss some best practices while operating first response units. Mike, Dave, I want to thank you both for joining me, and it's a pleasure to have you both back on the program.
Great to be here, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Well, guys, let's start off with a simple question when we're talking about these types of vehicles. What are some of the concerns with this type of vehicle or these types of vehicles in the fleet?
Yeah, Chris, this type of vehicle, first I want to say we're seeing more and more of these in the emergency service industry as time goes on. Departments are using SUVs or pickup trucks as first responders or quick response vehicles that are assigned to members to help alleviate some of the use of their own personal vehicles in some of these volunteer agencies. So the other side of it would be in larger, more career-oriented industry or agencies, you're going to see these vehicles as maybe supervisor vehicles, battalion chiefs, chiefs' cars, things of that nature. But in the VFIS program, what we're finding is that not only are these vehicles on the increase just in general, but the number of incidents or collisions that they're having with these vehicles is on the rise as well. So, and we believe that that's generally due to these vehicles are out in the street a lot more than normal fire apparatus or EMS units that are traveling or responding to 911 calls. These particular units are out in the streets running errands or going to meetings, just non-traffic use, as well as they're also responding, sometimes multiple units in these chiefs cars will be responding to the same incident. So there's just an overall higher exposure level we feel with these vehicles going out to 911 calls.
Mike, those are good points. And to add to that, you think about most of these vehicles have a single responder in them, whether it be a fire chief, EMS supervisor, which limits the oversight because you're riding with a partner or a crew, depending on what type of vehicle you're in. So being by yourself, there is less immediate oversight unless you have a driver monitoring system or something like that. A lot of these vehicles are also take-home vehicles. Organizations, especially volunteer fire departments, volunteer EMS departments, allow these vehicles to be taken home, and that response that can occur during off hours or at any time of the day or night if they're volunteer. Another really important area is non-member occupants. And what we mean by that is people who are not affiliated with the emergency service organization riding in that vehicle. And that does happen quite frequently, especially in the volunteer contingent agencies. And really important to keep in mind that if they're not affiliated with the agency, whether they're your family, friends, folks like that, that vehicle should be operated without lights and sirens. If you're going to respond to the scene, the guidance is not to respond to the scene, but if you're going to respond to the scene, that vehicle travels in a non-emergency fashion to assure protection for everyone in that vehicle.
What about, do you think there are more distractions in these types of vehicles in the cab than an engine that might have 3 or 4 people that can help us out and monitor some stuff?
That's a great follow-up, Chris, because you think about it, they're working, depending on the system, they're either working their phone or the radio or a mobile data terminal or something like that. So there's potentially less attention on the road as the single occupant trying to manage all those devices while they're driving. So yes, there should be, again, lack of oversight because they're the only person, but also they're the only person. So a super heightened level of awareness of how they're driving that vehicle.
So we have, there's conferences all over each state for EMS and fire. There's also national conferences where chiefs or leadership will attend. So sometimes they're going to use these vehicles outside of the service area. So can you talk about, some controls or some best practices on using the vehicles outside of the response area?
Yeah, Chris, I'll kind of go into that a little bit. And you oftentimes will see these vehicles outside of their primary service area. and that's not uncommon at all. But what our best practice suggestion would be to these organizations who allow that to happen, where the vehicle does travel outside of their first due district, that if an emergency comes in and they're wanting to respond to that particular incident, that response would, again, generate initially as a non-emergency response until they get inside their district, and then they can move towards that emergency response unit. What we don't want to have is a vehicle traveling a long distance over several districts trying to get to an emergency scene when there's other resources that are probably closer or could handle that more efficiently.
So what controls would you all recommend to possibly assist an organization with a chief vehicle exposure?
I'll take that one, Chris. You think, and we've done podcasts on modified response or reduced response. Is that vehicle a primary response vehicle that will make an immediate difference on arrival at the scene? Is there emergency response needed, or can they be a non-emergency asset responding as an assist? You think about mutual aid calls, especially where on the fire side, where it's 4 or 5 fire departments responding. Is the chief of a mutual aid company needed at that scene as an emergency response, or are they needed at that scene at all? A second part of that is anybody operating these vehicles, like any emergency vehicle that's part of an emergency service organization, should have comprehensive driver training, which means initial driver training, a stepped approach to operating that vehicle in an emergency fashion, orientation with the vehicle, and then ongoing driver training. Because just like our ambulances, our fire apparatus, they are another vehicle that we need to understand and train on and routinely train on to keep us as safe as possible.
Chris, I'll even add to those, all great points. I mean, Dave makes some really good points on that. And all the things that we've talked about so far certainly could be really, expectations could be set by reducing those things into another written SOG or standard operating guideline with regard to things or the leadership's expectations or the board's expectations with use of that vehicle. So, if you are going to take it home, what's the expectation of where you can park it? What use it could be utilized for? Can it be utilized to go to church with your family? Could it be used to run errands and go to the grocery store? Or is it simply there for if an alarm comes in, you respond directly from your house to the incident? So that expectation needs to be set in those SOGs and outlined for the users. The last thing, or a couple more things in conjunction with just doing a quality check as to what these drivers or who you're putting behind the wheel of these vehicles. We talked a little bit about them being single-use vehicles and a lack of oversight. So it's really good idea for organizations to have a true understanding of the driver's history on their MVR to analyze, what are they doing in their regular driving through their personal vehicle, through their general driving history that might translate into the use of this particular vehicle on behalf of the department. And then you can evaluate that exposure and figure out who you want to put behind that wheel and who you may not want to put behind that wheel. And last but not least is, the high level of technology that's out there in the vehicles and available today. Certainly driver monitoring systems are something to consider, and we make a strong encouraged push for these on our insureds, that they consider implementing these, especially in these single occupant vehicles, so that there's something there to either be utilized to coach the driver to improve their performance, or to reinforce something that might happen, and then we reinforce that driver did take the right action and correction, and that we back him and support them in that action. These vehicles also can be equipped with, on those driver monitoring systems, a GPS locator, which can also be set up for geofences to keep that vehicle within a certain area. So there's all great technology that's available to help control the use of that vehicle and to reinforce leadership's ultimate goal for the use of that vehicle.
And one last thing, can you speak to, the importance of, if you're going to adopt a driver monitoring system, to obviously include these vehicles, like you said, so there's not the sentiment that the frontline staff feels like that they're being picked on, that leadership and everyone is held to the same standard when we're doing these monitoring systems. Yeah,
so true. Is it's one of those things, if it's good for me, it's good for you. And it really sends a strong signal to your entire organization. If you're going to implement driver monitoring systems in frontline vehicles, boy, what a better place than to start with your leadership vehicles, showing that it's across the board, not just we're here to look at you.
Yeah, we're looking at everyone, not just the engines and not just the tenders and whatnot. So, gentlemen, it was a pleasure to have you back on the program. It's always great to talk to you, and thank you for your insight.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for having us, Chris.
And I want to thank you for listening to the program and for your interest in VFIS safety resources. I want to thank our guests Mike Baker and Dave Bradley once again for their time and information. Please consider subscribing to our program to stay up to date on new content releases. Also, if you like what you've heard, please consider leaving a review below. For more information about the many resources available from VFIS, please visit VFIS.com. And to submit ideas for future discussions, please reach out by email at VFISriskcontrol@VFIS.com. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day. The views, information, or opinions expressed during this program are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Gladfelter Insurance Group, VFIS, and its employees.